So in the next of our Warhammer 40k rules drops, we've got new stuff for the Emperor's Children. Let's take a look at the Court of the Phoenician and what it can do for the Emperor's Children and Fulgrim on the tabletop. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Emperor's Children and focusing on the next of Games Workshop's Grotmas detachments that they've released with the Court of the Phoenician. So far in this mini-series, we've had Astra Militarum, Night Lords, Blood Angels and Harlequins over the past few days. If you want to see my breakdown videos of those, feel free to check them out over the last few ones on the channel. Broadly speaking, so far I feel like Games Workshop have done really quite well with these detachments. Maybe not every one necessarily going to be the absolute powerhouse thing for their army. The Astra Militarum one certainly looks really quite mainstream and scary though, and the other three have really done well for a sort of sub-faction within the army, and all of them have been very solid upgrades on the themed detachment that came before. Today the next offering is the Emperor's Children one, which should mean that the one tomorrow will probably be the Space Wolves Saga of the Great Wolf, and plus at some point we're getting the balanced data slate this week. They often tend to release these on Wednesdays, so maybe we'll get this at the same time, unless they're just going to release the detachments individually first, and then give us the balanced data slate on the day after that. I guess we'll find out soon enough. For the Emperor's Children, we've had the Twisted Legion of Fulgrim and Slaanesh burst onto the scene in 2025, a recent range release for Warhammer 40k. Now developed into a bit more of a standalone army of their own, they had perhaps a medium-sized release of Chaos kits, most of the miniatures being all rather well received, though given that Games Workshop weren't particularly generous with the sort of generic Chaos Space Marine kit that they can field, they do have really quite a limited unit roster. Even more so than the other Deity Chaos Legions. In-game they've already had their ups and downs throughout 10th edition. Currently they're maybe a bit on the lower mid-end of the 40k power spectrum for most players, win rates around 45%, and just a couple of Grand Tournament wins over the past data slate meta. They are pretty notably lower compared with the other factions out there, and their internal balance isn't particularly great either, the vast majority of people using the coterie of the conceited on the competitive scene, a few experimenting with peerless bladesmen, but they are one of the armies at the moment where they only really tend to see one thing played regularly. For their new content today though, they've got a detachment called the Court of the Phoenician, the Phoenician referring to Fulgrim himself, and now that takes the Emperor's Children detachment roster up to 7 of them, really quite a lot for an army that's got a kind of narrow unit pool really, and I can't help but think that they might actually kind of do better with slightly fewer detachments, but actually bothering to balance the ones they've got already. The theming for this one though is around a court of Emperor's Children elites vying to gain the fleeting approval of their Primarch, and also in particular representing a host that Fulgrim himself might take to the field to lead, showing his depraved children how it's done in suitable style. The rules for this one do have some focus on Fulgrim, though not exclusively, otherwise the main broad theme seems to be supporting some of the bigger demon units a little bit more, like Demon Princes and Mauler Fiends, and helping things out in melee in general. But overall I feel like it adds up to being at least a fairly general purpose detachment for the Emperor's Children. I was suspecting that if they added in another one for the Emperor's Children they might go for a Sonic and Noise Marine focus, and perhaps a little bit surprised they managed to get to 7 detachments and not go down that theme of the army, given it's one of the ones they're better known for. Maybe they thought it just wouldn't be as easy to do just building around a couple of datasheets though. Getting into the rules for this one, and the core rule of the Court of the Phoenician is called Sensational Performance, and also in the core rule Fulgrim gets a special shout out as well, being able to use a couple of the stratagems cheaper. For the main bit, this applies to all your units though. You basically can choose to use this ability or choose not to when you're activated to fight in the fight phase. Essentially the rule is +1 strength and +1 AP to your melee weapons on the charge, though has similar sort of restrictions to the Emperor's Children core rule Thrill Seekers. When you come to make those melee attacks, if you're using this rule then you can't target something that you were engaged with at the start of the turn. So I guess no crafty tricks with charging one thing and then piling into the thing that you were already in close combat with. And you also can't target a unit that was the subject of another unit's attacks this phase, which does mean that you could still have 2 units both go into the same targets, though you'd have to choose the most important one that you want to activate this sensational performance for. The one that strikes first will be able to use it, the one that follows up won't be able to. As melee damage buffs go, it's a fairly solid and helpful one. Both bits are going to be at least a little bit target dependent. Some of the time the +1 strength isn't going to equate to a +1 to wound, and sometimes you're already going to be hitting the enemy's invulnerable save anyway. But between the two of them it makes a lot of your units a lot better against many other targets. Say for example Infractors are a lot scarier hitting at strength 5 and AP 2 as opposed to strength 4 AP 1 with their rerolls. The Lord Exultant just on their base stats gets to be strength 8 and AP -3 even before his go turn. Flawless Blades are a fairly scary strength 7 and AP 4 with this. Fulgrim's sweep attack goes up to AP 3. And perhaps weirdly one of the better on paper winners feels like the Spawn going to strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2 on their melee attacks. They're always going to have fairly swingy damage output, but that makes them very significantly better against a whole bunch of infantry targets. It certainly seems like a helpful core rule though, maybe feeling most impactful for Infractors at strength 5 AP 2, and as mentioned nice enough for Spawn, though it is going to help out most things at least a little bit. On top of this, Fulgrim also gets a special section for himself, like a few other detachments that build around a character. His special rule here is that once per battle round, you can choose to use one of these 2 stratagems at 1 command point fewer than it would be otherwise. We'll get to them specifically in a second, but one's basically smash through terrain for 0 CP, and the other one will be a full rerolls hits and wounds versus character keyword units, and that's a big 2 command point one going down to 1. Neither of those are particularly bad things. In particular, the move through terrain thing will mean that you can hide in behind a ruin and then just have a pretty excellent choice of where they're going to be able to go into in the enemy army. Really doesn't hurt to be able to have that basically for free, and the damage boost one is a really solid increase, but will only work against certain datasheets and not everything he'd want to fight. Compared with using him in other detachments though, it definitely gives you more of a solid nudge to try and include him in the army, though I would hope that Games Workshop also pair this with some sort of upgrade to him more generally. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Deploymats. They're an Australian-based maker of gaming mats and objective markers. You can find them links below in their Shopify store. They're currently launching some new products which they wanted to share, which are these sort of holographic objective markers, fairly common 40k battlefield accessories, basically having a central circle in the middle and then a 3-inch zone around that, so you can really easily see whether models are within range to score the objective or not. And their particular design on these ones have sort of a holographic style design, so the design will shift and warp around as you view it from different angles, and I think they look quite fun. They've got a few different designs and takes on these, some mysterious runes in a few different colours, ones that look like blood-spattered grounds, and ones that have a sort of warp lightning or synapse style effect. You can check them out in their store links below if you'd like to. Their other major product are their gaming mats. I believe some out of stock in Australia, though available to much of the rest of the world. They've got some really quite fun designs on them, where they basically have a piece of art with the deployment zone sort of loosely built into the art, rather than the sort of overlay style approach that a few of the other gaming mats have. I've quite enjoyed using the one that I have. They've got multiple different designs, and they're available either as double-sided ones or single-sided ones, which are a little cheaper. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. You can find them linked in the video description below if you'd like to take a look over their stuff. Let's move on to stratagems next though, and first up for 1 command point we have Contemptuous Disregard. This one gives you a -1 to wound versus either enemy shooting or melee if the enemy's weapon strength is greater than your toughness. So usually that's going to be a 2+ to wound becomes a 3, or 3+ becomes a 4. Quite a nice reactive durability boost to have, though it's going to be more effective against certain things without things like lethal hits or devastating wounds or stuff doing a good chunk of the damage. Sometimes just making a unit slightly unusually tougher is going to be a big deal with, say, being able to hit back harder in melee. For 2 command points, we've got Prideful Superiority. This wants to reroll all hits and wounds against a character keyword unit in melee. As mentioned, Fulgrim can use this for less, so he could use it for 1 command point if you don't use the other one this battle round. Rerolling all hits and wounds is a really solid damage output boost, but I feel like you are kind of getting what you're paying for given that you have to pay a big 2 command points for this one. That's not a low investment stratagem. And even then its use is a bit niche. You're only going to be able to activate this against certain enemy units, and if they've got big tanky infantry units or big monster or vehicles that aren't characters, you're not going to be able to activate this into them. And it's also far less standout for units that might have their own rerolls built in, say Infractors versus Objectives, and Lucius the Eternal would already get this. Between that it feels most standout for Fulgrim himself, I think. Looks like quite a good one for a sweep style profile. Maybe could do work for a big unit of Flawless Blades going into an enemy central character combo though. Next up, we've got really quite a fun one for Noise Marines. Close Quarters Execution is a shooting damage buff that activates within 12 inches. You get +1 strength and +1 AP on your shooting attacks, and given that the Emperor's Children just don't really have any other meaningful firepower, the Noise Marines are probably going to be the ones that you want to amp up with this one. The extra AP is very nice indeed, particularly as they ignore cover just at base, and overall I feel like you have some very significantly scarier profiles with those. Blastmasters gets to strength 11 and AP -3 with damage 3, and Sonic Blasters are strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2. And again, that's just a very general purpose profile that's solid against infantry equivalents, and it's going to do a lot more meaningful damage just as chip damage to things like toughness 10 or 11 vehicles on top of that. A squad firing with this, maybe particularly with a Lord Cacophonous, are going to do some pretty devastating damage here. Next up, for 1 command point, we've got Euphoric Inspiration. This one allows you to reroll or charge rolls for units within 6 inches of a demon keyword unit. So you could activate this, say with Fulgrim, a Demon Prince, or a Morphine model. As it goes, I think that this one's quite a niche one really, and you are going to be needing to effect multiple charge rolls nearby. The main thing to weigh it up against is using a command point reroll, as that's really quite powerful, as you don't actually need to commit that to the roll unless you actually fail it. So say if you just had a big demon unit charging and nothing else, it doesn't really make sense to use this one if you've got the command point reroll spare. You can just roll the dice and only spend the command points if your charge roll happens to fail, and just don't bother spending anything if it doesn't. If you do wind up having a great big melee where lots of units are trying to make charges nearby and those charges aren't particularly guaranteed, could be worth it though. And also could be an option to make a pivotal charge more reliable if you've already had to spend your command point reroll elsewhere in this charge phase. It still feels like one of the most niche ones overall though. Next up, for one command point, we've got Sinuous Breach. This one's for a demon keyword unit, and it allows it to move through terrain this phase with either normal, advanced or charge moves. This one seems like a solid all-rounder. It'll be good for Morphines, Demon Princes and Fulgrim. Fulgrim can already go through terrain that's less than 4 inches in height. So as mentioned earlier, if he does want to hide himself behind a bigger ruin and then just smash straight through it, he can potentially do that for free, or at least if he's not wanting to use the discounted character rerolls one. It does seem handy enough for the others as well though. Winged Demon Princes are pretty strong, and Morphines are usable enough. They'll quite like that as a ground-bound monster that would also like to hide behind terrain before charging out. And perhaps the existence of this one just gives you a little bit more of a nudge to include more big stuff like this in the army than you might do otherwise. Then finally, for one command point, we've got a pretty impactful one called Cataclysmic Stimulus. This one gives you a surge move of d6 inches for an Emperor's Children unit that just got shot and lost 1 or more wounds, so it doesn't have to be models lost with this particular one. And as per normal, that surge move goes d6 inches directly towards the closest non-aircraft model. You can make your way into engagement range if you want to, and potentially gives the opponent some annoying problems while they're trying to take things down in the midboard. You can't just move up a chaff unit to contest or take an objective and have them right next to an Emperor's Children unit, and then proceed to go on to shoot that Emperor's Children unit without at least some danger that they're just going to walk straight into close combat with your other units. This one feels particularly impactful and annoying for your opponent to think around, and might have a fair bit of value just for disrupting their play and what they're going to do. It's definitely potentially unsettling that they can't be safe from being jumped into melee with unless they're over 7 inches away. But on the other hand, you're not going to be reliably jumping into close combat with things unless they're fairly close. There's a pretty reasonable chance that you could use this one and then just fall short if you roll a 1 or 2 or something. It still seems like a very nice one though. Good to get extra damage in melee with anything in the army, though very nice for infantry units as well. If they're in close combat, then the opponent won't be able to shoot any more guns at them, and they'll survive till the fight phase at least. Then finally we've got the Enhancements. Tears of the Phoenix is 25 points, and allows you to ignore modifiers for the bearer's hit rolls, weapon skill and wound rolls. For me, that's just too expensive at 25 points. It does nothing unless your opponent has some sort of modifiers on the go, and plenty of armies just won't have that. It might have been a nice points filler if it was a fair bit cheaper. It would look a lot more tempting around the 10 or 15 point kind of mark. Far more interesting, we've got Exalted Patron. This one's 15 points and allows a Lord Exultant model to attach to a squad of Flawless Blades, and he gains a plus 1 inch move as well to allow him to keep up with them. That one's really quite an interesting option. It allows a cheap fighter character to go along with the elites. It'll be 95 points with this enhancement included, and gives you another option besides Lucius the Eternal at his very big price tag of 150 points and losing Lone Operative and Fights First. The Lord Exultant helps out the unit's damage output by giving them lethal hits. It's maybe not the biggest buff in the world if they're invoking the patrons, but still helps out with their damage output a little bit, and if they do invoke their patrons, then the Lord Exultant will be able to make use of their wounds everything on a 3+ rule. He might often be wounding things pretty well anyway with his lance melee attacks, though being able to wound stuff like Land Raiders on a 3+ with a whole bunch of AP3 and damage 2 melee attacks is going to make him even more well-rounded even against the toughest things in the game. Quite nasty to have that on his go turn with 8 attacks there, plus a whole bunch more Rapture Lash ones too. In this detachment on top of those buffs, he'll also often have a +1 strength and +1 AP from the detachment rule. Overall, this feels really solid, and it looks like it could be interesting enough either with a smaller squad or a bigger squad. Then we've got Soul Stain Made Manifest for 15 points. At the start of the enemy fight phase, a unit in engagement range must test Battle Shock at -1. That one's a bit on the situational side really. Probably the biggest impact usually on preventing certain defensive stratagems with a reasonable chance of success. It's never reliable though, and not really something to build around. This one feels like one that's kind of fine as a points filler, maybe on a Lord Exultant or something, as opposed to being actually good and sought after in its own right. Then finally we've got Spirit Sliver for 20 points. This one's Demon Prince only, and it's +1 strength and +1 attack to their melee weapons. So assuming that you're on the charge and activating the detachment buff, it means that Demon Princes in this detachment can hit all very hard indeed. 7 attacks at strength 10, AP3 and damage 3. Or if you're sweeping against infantry, 15 attacks at strength 8, AP1 and damage 1. That one again seems usable enough, though for 20 points it isn't the single biggest damage buff in the world. It doesn't necessarily seem auto-include, you're already getting some good stuff from the detachment rule, and quite a lot of the damage from the Winged Prince comes from its charge mortal wound things anyway. Overall, at first impressions for this one, it seems interesting but not crazy standout. Overall though, they just look like there's enough interesting stuff to at least be somewhat tempting. and the Coterie of the Conceited does have its issues as well. You have to activate the damage buffs, and a few of the stratagems aren't exactly some of the most exciting in the world. For this one, the core damage rule is okay, applicable enough to a few units, but there's some where it's maybe not going to make huge amounts of difference. I quite like the Noise Marine shooting stratagem, that's really quite a punchy one. Strength 6 and AP 2 Sonic Blasters, and a big Strength 11 AP 3 Blastmaster is rather good. For the other stratagems, the Surge move might potentially change the way that the opponent plays and can be disruptive. The -1 to wound is reliably handy, and the breaking through walls is nice. Out of the enhancements, I'd rate the Lord Exultant with Flawless Blades as being the single most interesting one. That one feels like it's easily enough worth running to me. You're going to have a pretty fast and terrifying melee threat with him joining either a 3 or a 6-man squad. Fulgrim himself might get a little bit more value out of this one, as mentioned. So outside of his discounted stratagems, it doesn't really feel like most of the rest of the detachment necessarily helps him out in a huge way compared with other choices. I guess he certainly could be a big impactful unit to use the Surge move on. It doesn't hurt to have fights first with that. Hopefully this isn't the only thing that they do for Fulgrim himself though. It'd be nice to see either some rules rewrites or potentially a further point drop in the balanced data slate. In any case, let me know your thoughts on this one. Thanks to Deploymats for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description below, with all their fancy objective markers and game mats. That's it for this one though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly be looking forward to talking some Space Wolves and balanced data slate later in the week, as well as more regularly scheduled 40k content just about every day. If you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description. Check that out if you'd like to support. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.